The leather folder struck the conference table with a sound sharp enough to stop every conversation in the room. Derek's hand was still wrapped around my elbow. "She has no business being here," my husband told the security officer. "Please escort her out." Across the table, his new 20-year-old fiancée lowered her champagne glass, smiling as though she had already won. Then Malcolm Reed, the founder and CEO of Reed Aerospace, opened the folder. He read the first page once. Then again. His chair moved backward. "Mr. Bennett," he said quietly, "take your hand off her." Derek laughed, but no one joined him. Malcolm turned the deed toward the company attorney and pointed to the signature beneath the embossed county seal. "Is this authentic?" The attorney checked the document, then looked directly at me. "Yes, sir." Malcolm stood. Around him, 12 executives slowly did the same. Derek finally released my arm. His eyes dropped to the name printed above the signature line. Claire Evelyn Bennett. And for the first time since he left me, my husband looked afraid. 3 weeks earlier, I was standing barefoot in the kitchen of a rented townhouse in Alexandria, Virginia, when a certified envelope slid through the mail slot. It landed beside a cardboard box labeled winter clothes, though half the things inside belonged to a life I no longer had. Outside, November rain tapped softly against the windows. The kitchen smelled of burnt coffee and the cinnamon candle my neighbor had given me after Derek left. She had called it a fresh start scent. I had not corrected her. Fresh starts usually came with better furniture. Inside the envelope was a formal notice from Reed Aerospace, the defense technology company where Derek had worked for 11 years. The company planned to refinance its headquarters in Arlington, and the bank's attorneys had discovered an irregularity in the property records. They needed the deed holder to appear in person. My name was printed twice. I read the letter, folded it along its original crease, and placed it beneath a chipped ceramic bowl on the counter. Then my phone rang. Derek. We had not spoken in 12 days. "Claire," he said, without saying hello. "Did you receive something from Reed?" I looked at the envelope. "Yes." His breath changed, just slightly. "It's probably an administrative mistake. Malcolm is hosting a financing dinner next Friday. The attorneys are cleaning up old records before the bank signs off." "I see. You don't need to come." That was Derek's favorite kind of sentence. It sounded helpful until you noticed it was an order. "I was specifically asked to appear." He gave a short laugh. "Claire, you don't understand corporate paperwork." I watched rain collect along the edge of the window. For 6 years, I had managed military logistics contracts whose mistakes could ground rescue aircraft across 3 states. But Derek still explained paperwork to me as though I had never opened an envelope without supervision. "I understand my name," I said. Silence. Then a woman spoke behind him. Young, bright, close enough to be standing beside his desk. "Is that her?" Derek lowered his voice. "Claire, don't turn this into something embarrassing." Her name was Madison Hale. She was 20, an executive intern at Reed Aerospace, and 2 months earlier, Derek had told me he was leaving because he had finally met someone who made him feel alive. I had been 39. Apparently, alive had an age limit. "The dinner is for senior leadership and investors," he continued. "Madison will be there with me. It would be better for everyone if you handled this through the attorneys." I picked up the envelope again. A small brass key slipped from between the pages and struck the counter. I had not seen it in 14 years. The tag attached to it carried one faded number. 2147. Derek heard the sound. "What was that?" "Nothing," I said. But as I turned the key over in my palm, I remembered exactly what it opened. And suddenly, I knew why Derek did not want me anywhere near that dinner. The key marked 2147 had once opened a steel cabinet in the basement of the Reed Aerospace building. Before Reed Aerospace, the 6-story brick property had been called the Langley Recovery Annex. It was not a hospital. It was where injured service members went after the hospitals were finished with them. They learned how to use prosthetic tools, rebuild engines with damaged hands, sit through job interviews without flinching at sudden noises, and explain gaps in their resumes without explaining the worst days of their lives. My father had helped open it in 1998. Colonel Thomas Evelyn had spent 27 years in the Army, and the final 10 years of his life, pretending my service had been a temporary rebellion. He had wanted a son. Instead, he had me. When I joined the Army, he told our relatives I was working for the government. When I commissioned as a logistics officer, he said I handled office supplies. When I came home from my second deployment with a Bronze Star and a tremor in my left hand that appeared whenever helicopters flew too low, He asked why I had not chosen a safer career. My father loved service. He simply had trouble accepting it in his daughter. I learned early that silence made family dinners easier. It did not make them kinder. The Langley Recovery Annex closed 2 years after his death. Federal funding shifted, the nonprofit dissolved, and the building was scheduled for sale. That was when Malcolm Reed approached me. Reed Aerospace was smaller then. 180 employees, 3 major contracts, and less than 6 months of operating cash. Malcolm needed a headquarters with secured workshop space. I needed to keep my father's building from becoming luxury apartments with a patriotic plaque in the lobby. The Evelyn Family Trust purchased the remaining debt. The deed was placed in my name. Reed Aerospace signed a 20-year lease with an option to buy, provided it maintained the first-floor training workshop for veterans transitioning into technical careers. Malcolm knew. The company attorney knew. A retired Marine named Martin Cole knew because he had helped me clean the basement before the first Reed employees moved in. Derek did not. At least, not then. I met my husband 4 months after the lease was signed. He was standing in the old machine shop wearing a borrowed hard hat and giving a group of new hires a tour. He was 30, ambitious and handsome in the polished way that made people assume confidence before he had earned it. He asked if I worked in facilities. I told him I was helping with the transition. That answer satisfied him. For years, I thought it was charming that Derek never asked for more. Later, I understood that he had already decided how important I was. We married after 18 months. During the early years, I traveled often. I reviewed aviation supply systems, assessed maintenance contracts, and advised manufacturers working with military rescue units. Derek called it consulting. At dinners, he told people I helped companies organize warehouses. I let him. Correcting him would have required explaining why I could not sleep after certain missions, why I checked restaurant exits before sitting down, why the sound of a dropped metal tray could pull my attention away from an entire conversation. Derek liked the version of me that required no accommodation. Quiet wife, simple job, no stories that made other men respect me before they respected him. The first time he introduced me as the organized one at home, everyone laughed. The 5th time, I stopped noticing. By our 7th anniversary, I had turned down a position in Huntsville because Derek said his career was finally gaining momentum. By our 9th, I had reduced my travel schedule because he complained that coming home to an empty house made him feel unmarried. By our 10th, he had begun calling my calmness a lack of passion. I thought compromise meant taking turns becoming smaller. Somehow, it was always my turn. 3 days after the certified letter arrived, Derek came to the townhouse. He did not knock. He used the key he had promised to return. I was sitting at the kitchen table with the deed notice, the brass key, and an old blue folder I had retrieved from a storage unit that morning. Derek entered carrying a white bakery box. For one foolish second, I thought it might contain the lemon cake he used to bring home on my birthday. Then Madison stepped in behind him. She wore a cream coat and held a phone in one hand. Her blonde hair was tied with a black ribbon. She looked younger inside my kitchen than she had in the photograph Derek posted after leaving me. Not guilty. Not cruel. Just young enough to believe that being chosen meant she had won something. "We brought pastries," she said. Derek placed the box on the counter. Madison wanted this to stay civil. I looked at him. "You brought her into my home to discuss our divorce?" "It isn't your home," he said. "It's a rental." The correction came quickly, almost eagerly. Madison glanced at him, then at me. I closed the blue folder. "What do you need?" Derek sat across from me without being invited. "The refinancing issue has become unnecessarily complicated." "Because the bank found the owner?" "Because an outdated document has your name on it." Madison stood beside him, one hand resting on the back of his chair. I noticed her engagement ring. It had the same narrow platinum setting as mine. The stone was larger. Derek followed my eyes and covered Madison's hand with his. "We didn't plan for you to find out like this. I found out when she answered your hotel room phone." His jaw tightened. "That isn't why we're here." He removed several pages from his briefcase and slid them toward me. The first page was titled Property Interest Disclaimer and Release. The language below it stated that I had no current or future claim to the Reed Aerospace headquarters and acknowledged that my name had appeared on previous documents only as a temporary nominee. I read it twice. Then I looked at the signature line. My name had already been typed beneath it. "You want me to sign away a building you say I don't own." "It's a technical correction. Then the company attorney can explain it. He's busy closing the financing." The same financing that requires my presence? Derek leaned back. Claire, this is exactly what I was worried about. What? You turning a clerical error into leverage because you're angry about Madison. Madison's fingers moved away from his shoulder. I watched the distance appear between them. Small, but real. I haven't mentioned Madison, I said. You didn't have to. Derek pushed a pen across the table. The company is about to announce a major expansion. Hundreds of jobs depend on this refinancing. If you delay it because you want revenge, people will know. There it was. Not a request. A warning shaped like public concern. I placed the pen back on his papers. Who prepared this? Our outside counsel. What is the attorney's name? He hesitated. Only half a second. But Derek had always underestimated how much could be heard in half a second. Claire, don't interrogate me. I opened the blue folder. Inside were the original closing records from 14 years earlier, the lease agreement, and the trust authorization bearing my father's signature. Derek stared at the papers. His confidence did not disappear. It changed direction. Where did you get those? They belong to me. He reached across the table. I placed my palm over the folder. Don't. It was not loud. Madison still stepped back. Derek looked at my hand as though he had never seen it resist him. Then he smiled. I forgot how dramatic you could be. He stood and adjusted his jacket. Keep the papers. Bring them Friday. Malcolm can explain the situation to you himself. You told me not to attend. I've changed my mind. That should have relieved me. Instead, I looked at the unsigned release. What happens Friday? The financing dinner. The bank will be there. Senior leadership. A few board members. And you want me to sign in front of them. I want this resolved. Madison picked up her handbag. At the door, she paused. Derek said you stopped working years ago. I looked at him. He studied the rain outside. I changed the kind of work I accepted, I said. Oh. Her eyes dropped to the military seal embossed on the old folder. Derek opened the door. Come on, Maddie. After they left, the bakery box remained on the counter. Inside were 12 champagne macarons. The same flavor Reed Aerospace served at its annual leadership banquet. I threw them away the following morning. On Wednesday, I drove to Arlington. The Reed Aerospace headquarters stood 3 blocks from the Potomac, its red brick walls cleaned and repointed but otherwise unchanged. The steel letters above the entrance were new. The narrow windows on the first floor were not. I parked across the street and watched employees pass through the glass doors wearing security badges. 14 years earlier, veterans had entered through those same doors carrying canes, resume folders, and the kind of patience that came from rebuilding a life one ordinary task at a time. My phone vibrated. An email from Derek. The subject line read, Friday required appearance. He had copied Malcolm Reed, the chief financial officer, 2 bank representatives, and the company's general counsel. The message stated that I had agreed to attend solely to correct an outdated title defect. I had agreed to no such thing. Below Derek's signature was his new title. Senior Vice President, Strategic Operations. The promotion had not yet been announced publicly. That explained the dinner. It also explained the urgency. The refinancing was tied to the expansion. The expansion was tied to Derek's promotion. And my signature stood between him and both. I was still reading when someone tapped on the passenger window. Martin Cole stood outside in a Navy facilities jacket. He was 62 now, broader through the shoulders than most men 20 years younger, with a silver Marine Corps pin fastened above his security badge. I lowered the window. He studied my face. Then his posture straightened. Major Bennett? Not anymore. To me, you are. I smiled despite myself. Martin glanced toward the headquarters. Does Malcolm know you're here? No. He's been asking for you. Derek said this was a title error. Martin's expression hardened. There's no error. A delivery truck passed behind him, drowning the street in diesel noise. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Martin lowered his voice. They cleared the veterans' workshop last month. I looked at the first floor windows. The old training room had once held adjustable workbenches, computer stations, and a row of locked cabinets. Cabinet 2147 had contained the original building records and letters from the first veterans who completed the program. What do you mean, cleared it? Derek ordered everything moved to storage, said the space was needed for the new executive showroom. Did Malcolm approve it? Derek said he did. Martin did not need to add that he did not believe him. When is the showroom opening? Friday night. I looked at Derek's email again. Not a financing dinner. A celebration. held inside the one room the lease required them to preserve. Martin rested one hand on the window frame. There's something else. He handed me a printed maintenance request. The request authorized disposal of obsolete basement records, including the contents of cabinet 2147. Derek's electronic signature appeared at the bottom. Authorized for destruction. I read the line twice. The key in my coat pocket suddenly felt heavier. Were the records destroyed? No. Why not? Because I recognized the cabinet number. Martin looked toward the building before meeting my eyes again. And because your husband offered me 6 months severance to say they were. The traffic light changed. Cars moved around us. Inside my chest, something became very still. For 10 years, I had defended Derek by translating his selfishness into stress, ambition, loneliness, or fear. But this was not a careless remark at dinner. It was not an affair explained as a search for happiness. He had removed a protected veterans program, attempted to destroy ownership records, and offered a former Marine money to lie about it. He had crossed into a place where silence no longer preserved peace. It only protected the person causing harm. Where are the records now? I asked. Martin reached into his jacket and gave me a small white access card. Conference Room B. Malcolm's general counsel secured them this morning. He knows? He knows someone tried to destroy them. He doesn't know why. I took the card. Martin stepped back from the car. Friday, 7 o'clock, he said. Derek scheduled the deed correction for after the expansion announcement. Of course he had. He wanted the applause first. Then my surrender. Friday evening, I arrived at Reed Aerospace, wearing a charcoal suit I had not touched since my last Pentagon briefing. The lobby smelled of polished wood, champagne, and fresh paint. Through the glass wall of the former veterans' workshop, I could see white display platforms where the adjustable workbenches had once stood. Madison was posing for photographs beside Derek. His hand rested at the center of her back. When he saw me, his smile did not change, but his eyes dropped immediately to the leather folder beneath my arm. You came, he said. You required my appearance. He leaned closer. Sign the release, Claire. Then leave with some dignity. Behind him, Malcolm Reed entered with the company attorney and 2 bank representatives. Martin followed carrying a steel archive box marked Cabinet 2147. Derek turned. For the first time that evening, his smile slipped. Then he reached for my elbow, and the leather folder struck the conference table. The leather folder struck the conference table with a sound sharp enough to stop every conversation in the room. Derek's hand was still wrapped around my elbow. She has no business being here, he told the security officer. Please escort her out. Across the table, Madison lowered her champagne glass. Malcolm Reed opened the folder. He read the first page once. Then again, his chair moved backward. Mr. Bennett, he said quietly, take your hand off her. Derek laughed, but no one joined him. Malcolm, this is exactly what I warned you about. Claire is upset about the divorce. She found an old document and now she thinks. I know what she thinks. Malcolm turned the deed toward the company attorney. Is this authentic? The attorney checked the embossed county seal, then compared the recording number with the title report beside him. Yes, sir. Malcolm stood. Around him, 12 executives slowly did the same. Derek finally released my arm. His eyes dropped to the name printed above the signature line. Claire Evelyn Bennett. He stared at it as though the letters had rearranged themselves. This doesn't make sense. The bank attorney adjusted his glasses. It makes complete sense. Mrs. Bennett is the recorded owner of the property. Former Mrs. Bennett, Madison whispered. No one looked at her. Derek turned to Malcolm. You told me the company owned this building. No, Malcolm said. I told you Reed Aerospace had occupied it for 14 years. That's the same thing. It is not remotely the same thing. Malcolm placed one hand on the table. The Evelyn Family Trust acquired the debt on this property when the recovery annex closed. Claire paid the outstanding obligations and leased the building to us under a 20-year agreement. Derek looked at me. You had this kind of money? The question did not hurt as much as the surprise behind it. Not because he had never known, because he could not imagine that I had ever been worth knowing. It wasn't cash in a private account, I said. It was a trust established by my grandfather and expanded by my father. You hid it from me. I protected it from becoming marital property because its purpose was restricted before I ever met you. The company attorney slid a second document across the table. The trust may fund veteran rehabilitation military family transition programs, and related property maintenance. It cannot be used for personal luxury, transferred to a spouse, or pledged against unrelated debt. Derek's face tightened. So this whole thing is some charity arrangement? Malcolm's gaze sharpened. This arrangement kept Reed Aerospace alive. He turned toward the executives. 14 years ago, no commercial landlord would lease to us without a personal guarantee. Claire waived the guarantee, accepted reduced rent, and deferred 18 months of payments while we completed our first rescue aircraft contract. A few people looked at me. I looked at the table. Derek gave a disbelieving laugh. She never worked here. No, Malcolm said. She worked before there was a here. He opened the archive box Martin had carried into the room. Inside were lease records, correspondence, and old photographs from the Langley Recovery Annex. Malcolm lifted a letter with faded army stationery. Major Bennett reviewed the original maintenance system we later adapted for our military supply division. Derek's eyes moved slowly toward me. You were a major? I left active duty before we married. You told me you worked in logistics. I did. You said you organized warehouses. No, you said that. The distinction settled between us. For years, Derek had repeated his version of my life until even I had stopped correcting it. Madison stared at him. You told everyone she hadn't worked in years. Derek ignored her. This has nothing to do with the expansion. It has everything to do with the expansion, the company attorney said. He placed the lease agreement beside the deed. Section 9 requires the first-floor workshop to remain dedicated to veteran retraining for the duration of the lease. Removing the equipment without written consent constitutes a material breach. Derek looked at Malcolm. You approved the showroom. I approved a proposed expansion, Malcolm replied. I did not approve removing the veterans' workshop. I sent you the revised plans. You removed the label from the room. The attorney opened another file. You renamed it Underutilized Demonstration Space. For the first time, Derek stopped trying to look offended. He looked cornered. It was an outdated program. Barely anyone used it. Martin stepped forward. 37 people used it last year. Derek turned toward him. You work in facilities. I trained there. Martin removed his silver Marine Corps pin and placed it beside the lease. After an injury ended my service, that workshop taught me how to work with my hands again. Major Bennett built the first adjustable bench herself because the commercial models were too expensive. I felt every eye in the room move toward me. Martin continued. She also hired me when I couldn't get through an interview without walking out halfway. Martin, I said softly. But he shook his head. You've been quiet long enough. Derek looked from him to me. Then his expression changed. Not guilt. Calculation. All right, he said. Claire owns the building. We correct the lease violation, reopen the workshop, and proceed with the financing. The bank attorney closed his folder. That will not resolve the attempted title fraud. A different silence followed. Derek's head snapped toward him. What fraud? The company attorney slid the unsigned release onto the table. This document identifies Mrs. Bennett as a temporary nominee with no ownership interest. That statement is false. I was told it was standard. By whom? Derek glanced at the executives. No one answered for him. The attorney continued. The outside counsel named on this document does not represent Reed Aerospace. The firm confirmed this afternoon that it did not prepare the release. Madison looked at Derek. You said the company lawyers wrote it. He did not respond. Martin opened the archive box and removed the destruction order. And this authorized the disposal of original title records. Malcolm read Derek's electronic signature. His shoulders lowered. Not in defeat. In disappointment. You tried to destroy the files? They were duplicates. You offered Martin money to confirm they had been destroyed. That was severance. It was 6 months' salary for one sentence, Martin said. You told me to say the cabinet had been empty. Derek's voice rose. I was protecting this company. No, Malcolm said. He did not shout. He did not need to. You were protecting your promotion. The words struck harder than anger would have. Derek looked around the room, searching for someone who still saw him as the man he had been 30 minutes earlier. No one met his eyes. Madison slipped the engagement ring from her finger. She placed it beside her champagne glass. You knew this could be criminal, she said. Maddie, don't be dramatic. The phrase was so familiar that I almost smiled. He had used it on me for years whenever the truth became inconvenient. Now Madison heard it clearly. She stepped away from him. Derek turned back to me. This is what you wanted, isn't it? No. To humiliate me in front of everyone. I asked you not to touch the records. I asked you to let the company attorney explain the deed. You chose this room. His jaw tightened. You could have told me who you were. I looked at him for a long moment. You lived beside me for 10 years. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. Malcolm closed the archive box, but I placed my hand on the lid. There is one more document. I removed a sealed envelope from the leather folder. The words on the front were written in my father's handwriting. For Claire, when the building is threatened. My hands began to tremble. Not much, just enough for Martin to notice. I had carried that envelope through 2 deployments, 1 funeral, and 10 years of marriage without opening it. The trust attorney had told me it contained my father's final instructions. I had always assumed they would sound like the rest of his life. Practical, distant, disappointed. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet. I read the first line silently. Then Malcolm asked, "What does it say?" My throat tightened. I forced the words out. My father wrote that the building was never meant to preserve his name. I paused. He said it was meant to preserve mine. The room blurred at the edges. I continued reading. He knew I believed he was ashamed of me. He wrote that he had watched me carry soldiers home, rebuild supply routes, and return without asking anyone to understand what it cost. I stopped. The rest was harder. He said he mistook my silence for distance because he was too proud to admit that my courage frightened him. No one moved. He left the building to me because he trusted me to protect people who came home carrying things they could not explain. I folded the letter carefully. For 14 years, I had believed the deed was my father's final assignment. It was not. It was his apology. Derek looked at me, but whatever he had planned to say no longer mattered. Malcolm turned to the company attorney. Suspend Mr. Bennett's access immediately. Preserve every email, transfer request, and title document connected to this expansion. The attorney nodded. Security approached. Derek stepped backward. You're firing me over a room? Malcolm looked through the glass wall at the white display platforms, covering the old workshop floor. No. Then he looked at the false release. I'm removing you because you believed anything quiet could be taken without consequence. Security escorted Derek toward the door. He called my name once. I did not turn around. For the first time in our marriage, I did not mistake being needed for being loved. Derek was escorted out through the same glass doors he had entered beneath a banner announcing Reed Aerospace's future. The banner stayed. His photograph did not. By Monday morning, the company had suspended him pending an internal investigation. The financing was paused. The bank requested a full review of every document connected to the expansion, and Reed Aerospace's board hired independent counsel. No one asked me to decide whether Derek should be prosecuted. That decision belonged to the attorneys and the county investigators. For years, I had carried consequences that belonged to other people. I was finished doing that. Malcolm called me the morning after the dinner. I owe you an apology, he said. You didn't prepare the release. No, but I promoted the man who did. He asked if I intended to terminate the lease. Under Section 9, I could have. The breach was clear. So was the attempted manipulation of the deed. For several hours, I sat at my kitchen table with the agreement open in front of me. Ending the lease would have been simple. Reed Aerospace would lose its headquarters. The expansion would collapse. Derek's former colleagues would spend months wondering whether their jobs were safe. There was a time when I might have considered that justice. But punishment and justice are not always the same thing. I called Malcolm back. I'm not terminating the lease. He was quiet. There will be conditions, I continued. The executive showroom would be dismantled. The Veterans Workshop would be restored and expanded. An independent nonprofit board would oversee the program, and no executive would be allowed to remove, rename, or reduce it without written approval from the trust. Martin would become the program's first director. Malcolm agreed before I finished speaking. I also want the false documents preserved, I said. No private settlement that makes them disappear. You have my word. I trusted someone else's word for 10 years. He understood. Then you'll have it in writing. Derek contacted me 6 times that week. The first message blamed Malcolm. The second blamed the attorneys. The third blamed stress. By the 5th, he was apologizing. Not for the affair. Not for bringing Madison into my kitchen. Not for reducing my life to make his look larger. He apologized for misjudging how much power I had. That was when I understood he still did not know me. I did not respond. The divorce mediation took place 2 months later in a quiet office in Fairfax. Derek arrived without the polished confidence he had once worn like a tailored suit. His company phone was gone. So was the expensive watch Reed Aerospace had given him after his last promotion. He looked tired. For a moment, I felt the old reflex rise in me. Explain. Comfort. Make the room easier for him. Then I noticed my hands resting calmly on the table. I let the silence remain. His attorney presented a proposal. Derek wanted a portion of the building's increased value, arguing that our marriage had supported its growth. My lawyer opened the trust agreement and pointed to the restricted property clause. The request ended there. Derek stared at the page. You planned this from the beginning. No, I said. My father did. He looked at me. You could have trusted me. I almost answered the way I would have years earlier. I almost apologized for what I had kept private. Instead, I asked one question. What would you have done if you had known? He opened his mouth, then closed it. That was answer enough. I did not take his retirement account. I did not ask for support. I kept the townhouse lease until spring, my personal savings, and the property my family had placed beyond the reach of any marriage. Derek kept the things he valued enough to argue over. The car, the furniture, the wine collection. He left the mediation with more possessions than I did. I left with nothing that required me to stay connected to him. Madison sent me a letter in March. She had resigned from Reed Aerospace and returned to college. She wrote that Derek had told her our marriage had ended years before he moved out. He had said I was dependent, bitter, and unwilling to build a life of my own. She apologized for believing him. I wrote back once. You were young. He was responsible for the vows he broke. I did not tell her to forgive herself. That was work only she could do. By early summer, the first floor of the Reed building looked familiar again. The glass platforms were gone. Adjustable workbenches stood beneath the windows. New computers lined one wall. A soundproof room had been added for veterans who needed a quieter place to learn. Above the entrance, Martin installed a simple brass plaque, the Evelyn Transition Workshop. I asked him to remove my father's rank from the design. He earned it, Martin said. He did. Then why leave it off? Because people should not have to salute a name before asking for help. Martin considered that. Then he nodded. The first training group included 11 veterans and 4 military spouses rebuilding careers after years of moving between bases. On opening morning, Malcolm asked me to speak. I declined. Instead, I stood near the back while Martin welcomed them. No one announced who owned the building. No one stood when I entered. That was exactly how I wanted it. A woman named Denise sat at one of the workbenches, struggling to fasten a small metal component with her left hand. Her right wrist was supported by a brace. I pulled up a chair. Try turning the clamp toward you, I said. She did. The piece locked into place. Denise smiled. You work here? Sometimes. That evening, I drove home to a small house near Mount Vernon that I had bought after the divorce was finalized. It had a narrow porch, 2 maple trees, and a kitchen window facing west. There were no cardboard boxes in the hallway. No second toothbrush beside mine. No one waiting to tell me I had misunderstood my own life. I made coffee and carried it outside. The air smelled of cut grass and summer rain. A helicopter crossed the river in the distance. My shoulders tightened for a moment, then eased. I watched it disappear beyond the trees. And for once, I did not feel abandoned by the quiet. I felt held by it. For most of my life, I believed strength meant needing less. Less reassurance, less attention, less space. I thought being easy to live with was the same as being loved. I thought silence kept peace, even when the peace only existed because I kept swallowing the truth. My father mistook my quietness for distance. Derek mistook it for weakness. And for too long, I made the same mistake. Silence can be strength. But only when it is chosen. When silence is demanded to protect someone else's comfort, it becomes a cage. I did not heal because a room full of executives finally learned my name. I did not become valuable when Malcolm stood up or when the deed was placed on the table. My value had existed before anyone recognized it. The building was never the thing that saved me. The truth did. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the absence of self-betrayal. Some evenings, I still sit on my porch and watch the light fade across the maple trees. No applause, no title, no one asking me to prove who I am. Just a quiet house, a warm cup in my hands, and a life that finally fits without requiring me to become smaller. If this story touched something in you, I hope you remember this. You do not have to become smaller to keep someone else comfortable. You do not have to explain your worth to people who only notice it after they lose access to you. Sometimes strength is not fighting louder. Sometimes it is signing nothing, saying one honest sentence, and walking toward a life that no longer asks you to betray yourself. If you know someone who has been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel invisible, share this story with them. They may need the reminder that quiet strength is still strength, even when no one applauds it. Thank you for spending this time with me.